part of the issue with why we have this out of balance perspective on government's role in things is because the way our country has evolved over the last several decades is to see government as more and more central. Mm-hmm. So our mentality is to see government as the primary solution to things, but because of that, we also see it as the primary problem to things.
But usually this is masked as, we the people, we have to stand up, we have to fight for our rights, we have to, we have to make sure this injustice isn't happening, that injustice isn't happening. Yeah. Usually what that means is it's just more laws, rules, and regulations get crammed down from the government.
So what happens is that when there's a problem, we are trained, our minds go straight to government as either the solution or the problem of it. That's really not the right mindset to have. The first place we should be looking, number one, is ourselves, personal, and then number two, our communities and the organizations.
Start small, go big, not go big
but
first.
Exactly. So we have it reversed. So when there's an issue like we're facing and the black community feels like they're not being heard and that there are these problems, we are automatically assuming, well, this must be a government issue. And I will give, and I don't know how anybody objectively could say otherwise, there has been systemic racism in our country. And definitely, I'd say since 1964 with the Civil Rights Act and since 1968 abolishing redlining, there's no empirical evidence necessarily of systemic racism today.
But it also might depend on which minority community you're actually looking at, because there's actually a pretty firm statistical case to be made that affirmative action actually hurts minorities that aren't necessarily underrepresented, aka Asians. And obviously I kind of have a dog in the fight on that one, being an Asian American. But I think affirmative action is an interesting case of we might be implementing a solution, or we say, there's these particular minorities, they're not represented enough in these particular fields, so we need to have some kind of government intervention.
Right.
And we don't actually realize that you might be hurting that minority community to start with, and there might be some other repercussions of hurting other minorities to begin with these weird or with these government interventions like Daniel's talking about, because we're looking to this governing body to make these changes, to affect changes in our lives, rather than looking more personal, and how can I actually make these changes? Because honestly, there's no bureaucrat, no president, no senator, no representative that's going to care about your interests like you do.
Right.
And that's the beauty of, that's the beauty of the founding principles of this country, is that direct and focus and the priority is on the individual. And I think as farther we get away from that, specifically in the African American community, when we look at basically the government encouraging women with the war on poverty with Lyndon B. Johnson, supposedly good programs to help pull the African Americans out of poverty, or to supposedly lower poverty rates. That hasn't changed, but we spent a ton of money, $20+ trillion in the process of these programs, but it hasn't actually addressed the key issue to begin with.
And a lot of metrics for the black community has actually gotten worse, considerably worse since the 1960s.
Yeah. Especially
with the welfare state.
Yeah, and the case in point with the single motherhood rate being 22% in 1960 to today in 2018, 65%.
So what the point I want to make is that because we have this predisposition, basically this underlying belief that everything revolves around government, even when there's evidence to suggest that the issue we're facing may not be directly government related, we're not even open to thinking those thoughts, because we've already assumed in our minds what the issue or what the solution is, and it tends to be revolving around government, which is exactly what politicians want us to think, and that's what the media wants us to think. It's not popular to say it's a personal thing. It's not popular to say it's a community thing.
It's kind of hard. It's much easier and cooler and hotter to just say, hey, we're going to spend X amount of money on this fancy program. We're going to throw it at this particular problem.
And we have to keep in mind that politicians have their own motives in mind, and that they like this division, and they like the fear, and they like all of that, because that gives them opportunity to step in and to be the savior. And they want to be the savior. The same thing with the news outlets. they are businesses,
Yeah.
businesses that thrive on ratings and on
And
views
hype and interest.
and fear. Fear definitely gets more ratings and gets more views, and so it's money in their pockets. So we know it doesn't take any speculation or anything to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are ulterior motives for media outlets and for politicians to push this. But here's what I do want to say: I'm not going to sit here and try to act like systemic racism hasn't been a problem.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily clear since the 1960s if systemic racism is actually a substantial issue today or not. It's definitely not nearly as substantial as it used to be. It could be argued that there's still some residue, and it could be argued that to some extent maybe.
And if there is, let the evidence be presented, and let's take a look at it. But the problem is, I think with these conversations generally, is it's linguistics, right? Linguistics when we talk about institutional oppression or systemic problems, because there's a strong case to be made that America on an individual basis, it's hard to find racists. Like it's hard to find people that will tie themselves, that will tie themselves to these ideas, and like if we're talking about if we're talking about interracial marriage approval. Like it's increased dramatically. I believe in Gallup 1958 poll that basically polled Americans, I believe, at 4% approving of interracial marriage, and where to 2016 where it's 87%. Like I think we're gonna have a hard time finding people that are gonna come out and say no, like, and this actually affect their lives, on a personal belief level, and I think in lieu of that. That's why there's the linguistics of the arguments has been so vague. Right. And what do I mean by that is like when you say systemic oppression, it's like, well, I'm not saying you're a racist. I'm not saying that I'm a racist. I'm not saying that he's a racist. I'm just saying that the system itself, that there are issues and barriers that I can't really point to, but it's systemic and it's all up in the system. And I can't necessarily point to it, but it's there, and just promise me it's there. So please take all these policy prescriptions. Like, please take all these things that I think are the solutions. And I think that's part of where the issue is. We're having a hard time finding, like, okay, what exactly, like pinpointing, what exactly are you talking about when you say, like, systemic racism? What racism? Which people? So if it's there, I want to fight it. But I don't want to do more harm. Being too good or being too quick
to just prescribe policies to address or even be a solution to that oppression.
Because I don't want to do more harm than good fighting something that may or may not exist.
Right.
And it's the same thing with implicit bias. So the two main, there's three main arguments being made. One is systemic racism, which, like you said, is very hard to put your finger on exactly what that even is at this point, because we don't have Jim Crow laws, we don't have redlining legalized anymore. So that's very vague. Implicit bias is extremely vague. So you can't really,
your unconscious thoughts and your unconscious
it's like,
feelings.
well, okay, maybe you're not really a racist consciously. Maybe you never actually deliberately think racist thoughts or discriminate, but I bet you that you are actually a racist. You just don't know it.
And
you're just not
at the end of the day,
it.
maybe some of those implicit and blink reactions do play out and do have an influence in our behavior and in some of our actions.
They sure do.
This is some of the concepts that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book called Blink. In that, maybe there are influences that actually occur based upon these snap judgments that we make, based upon things in our subconscious. But the question is, it's in your subconscious, right? It's really hard to control those things, and it's hard to control the subconscious minds of others. What I can control is my own personal actions, my own personal beliefs, and how I choose to operate myself in the world. What I'm scared of is it's a concept that was prescribed, I believe, in the 50s by a psychologist named Julian Rotter. Is a concept of the locus of control. Do I have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control? And I think what is far, far more dangerous to the African American community and far more dangerous to minority individuals and young Americans everywhere, that are growing up in the United States and wondering, hey, how am I going to make it in this? How am I going to make it in this society, in this economy, in this culture? How am I going to find a place for myself here to fulfill my purpose and get meaning in my life? By prescribing people, I think it's far more dangerous than supposed police brutality and some cop in the bushes waiting out there to get me. I think what's far more dangerous is to teach people that they're victims, to teach people that they don't have any control, that they have what Julian Rotter prescribed as an external locus of control, meaning that the control comes externally in their lives, and they don't have. They can't make an impact. They can't happen to the world. The world happens to them.
Right.
I know we've talked about this before. As opposed to having an internal locus of control, meaning I happen to the world. I can control my destiny.
Well, to kind of address that, back to the analogy you're talking about, the cards that were dealt, how we play them.
Yes.
Right. When you play cards, some are more powerful than others. Some cards are more powerful than others.
Yeah.
So so I think the issue is that yes, internally, we want to play the cards. The situation that we grew up in, I want to make the best out of it.
Yes.
But you can only go so far.
Yeah.
You can only do so much. And then when you also have a system or people in a system that say, look, this is all you got. I'm not going to help you. This is all you got for me. This is it. This is it. I'm not going to contribute to, elevating, you, for example, like from, poverty to, working class. You know what I mean? Because I feel like you can only do so much. I'm not saying you have to rely on the system and the government and all that, but that's kind of like the hope. That's where you can see where people place their hope in, because some of them, though, they do as much as they can, yet can't get nowhere. Now, there's just some people that just want the government to elevate them, they don't do anything. But then there's just some people out there that they give all they got.
Yeah.
They give all they got.
According to the data, basically that number of people is very, very, very small.
It's very small.
Very small.
It's very small.
And like I said, the Brookings Institute,
small,
basically it's like 2 to 5% of people that if they don't follow those 3 rules, right? If they don't graduate high school, which in this country, public education in high school is free. Number 2, if they get a job and keep it, meaning they're not jumping from job to job. They just get in one job and keep it. And then number 3, don't have kids before you're married.
Right.
If you do those 3 things, doing all you can do, which is not like I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm not saying it's not impossible for most people to do.
Right.
Basically, those of people that follow that prescription, the Brookings Institute suggests that 2 to 5%, like very, very few people followed that prescription and were still in poverty. Like 95% or plus of people that followed that prescription, they got into the middle class here in this country. And so what I'm afraid of is by teaching kids, oh no, you're a victim. There's the only thing that you really have to worry about is that guy out there in the bushes, that police officer, he's out to get you, and there's nothing you can do to get up. That is probably more destructive than anything. And what's really sinister and nasty about it is you vote the way I want you to. You do what I want you to do because there's these factors out there. I'll take care of you. That is scary.
Right.
That is antithetical to rugged individual Americanism. That I am in control. That I can, regardless of the cards I have, that I can play them. And that was the story of my family, right? Like coming to this country, not wealthy, not rich. And going back to going back and kind of taking a heritage trip a couple of years ago to the Philippines, where my mom is from, where people are making $8 a day. Like those people probably, they might have a case to be made like, hey, I'm stuck down here. I don't really have a way up and out. Like they might have a case to be made. But some kid that's sitting in their basement and watching media here in the United States and failing their classes, not giving any effort, and accusing other people and other forces, like I can't get ahead in this world. Like that, I can't think of more privilege, and I'm sure you would agree with this, coming from the background of your parents. I can't think of. There's very few privileges I can think of that are more incredible in this world than to have a citizenship in the United States of America. And to have an opportunity in this country.
To elevate.
And what scares me is what millions of people would give for the country that I came from, would give. And that was one of the things that really struck me is like, wow, I'm a U.S. citizen. This gives me incredible opportunity that these other Filipinos that I'm around, they would give almost anything to become U.S. citizens. I have, and millions of kids that I know back home that don't even appreciate it. Right. They're trying to accuse the system and wasting all these opportunities because politicians who want to push their agenda, their policies that they want to get reelected, are feeding fear and hysteria to these masses of people and they're throwing away this opportunity and staring at these tiny problems and not seeing the great and incredible amount of opportunity they have to better themselves. That's heart-wrenching to me. Like that's I can't. There's fewer things that I can think of that are more of a nightmare than that. That
it's cruelty,
and that is what I think the left is perpetuating on young people, and that scares me. And that's what motivates me.
So let me say that I think I know what you mean by that.
Yeah, and that's definitely an oversimplification.
I think I know what you mean by that. Whether it's a tiny problem or not, whether we're talking about the African American community and problems that they're facing that very well may not be tiny.
Right.
If I'm a kid, okay, let's just put this on a very personal level.
Okay.
If I'm a kid and I have some sort of disability, it may not be a tiny disability. It may be very impairing.
Sure
but it is poisonous to that kid. It would be poisonous to me for one of my parents to come to me and say, "Son, you're just messed up, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you're probably just never going to make it very far in life because you've just been dealt some bad cards, and they're robbing me of that internal locus of control, like you're saying, and they're taking my dignity away from me when they do that, and I'm gonna at that moment become a victim to my impairment and believe that I can never do great things. Whereas if you take that same kid with an impairment and you keep telling them over and over, you can overcome that, you can do great things, you can be whatever you want to be, and you give them that dignity and empower them, they can do incredible things. And we see people with great impairments do incredible things.
Right.
And so it's a lot more about empowering people. And even if you have a serious problem, and even if systemic racism was true to the extent that they say it is, and even if these problems are true to the extent that they say they are, that does not mean that you couldn't overcome them and still do great and incredible things. And we've seen great evidence of that through very many successful Black people. So it's cruel to start teaching kids that they are victims
from the gun.
Right, and I think that gets back to a cultural issue, which has been partly brought on by the history of systemic racism.
That's what I was going to add on.
So there is residue, I think, mentally and culturally.
Much residue,
Right, and I think that has had some pretty severe side effects.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it's inexcusable, but it's kind of like when the odds have been against you for so long, it's like there's no other choice but to be victimized.
It's hard to get.
It's like kind of hard. Now for me, personally, I've never had those issues.
Honestly, you're one of the biggest self-starters that I know. Like I go to you for inspiration.
Yeah, thank you, man. But just kind of looking at the history, and this is me just trying to get perspective and empathy, because trust me, I'm with you guys 100%. I don't want to be a victim for anything. But sometimes it's just so sad and unfortunate that when your ancestors have gone through so much and that passes down for years, even though you've had like 13th Amendment, you've had even the government kind of and emancipate all these wonderful things, to really kind of elevate, the community.
Your heritage is not going to be erased. History is not going to be erased.
It's not going to be erased.
No.
And it's like I said, it's just unfortunate that that's kind of where the thinking lies. The thinking is not what can I do today. The thinking is more of what has been done to me yesterday. And it's like
admittedly, it's hard to snap out of that. And I think that's our job, is to try to help and inspire people, empower people. That I'm not saying that you're going to be LeBron James. I'm not saying that you're going to be Tiger Woods.
Right.
But turns out there's only one LeBron James. There's only one Tiger Woods. Turns out, be careful about looking to celebrities and people that are the outliers. Be careful about looking to them. I think what troubles me about celebrities is that we kind of get we get our focus off in the sense of like, if I don't have this or this or
Then
this,
I'm not succeeding.
Yeah, then I'm not succeeding.
Yeah,
It turns
yeah,
out
yeah.
compared to the rest of the world, like my country or where my grandparents came from and lived, where my mom came from, where people are making $8 a day. Just the fact to be able to have the opportunity to live in the middle class here in the United States, or even to live poor in the United States,
Is enough.
it's
living,
compared to the rest of the world. And so I think part of this is our perspective. I'm not saying you should be happy living poor in the United States.
Right.
I'm just saying that getting some perspective, like we were talking about, the more people that we have to give us more perspective. I think as we take more perspectives from even outside the United States and into the world as well, that gives us a glimpse into just how special America is. Not in the sense of like, wow, we're number one and we can just put our foot on the necks of other people. We're number one, but in the sense like, wow, we have an incredible and amazing privilege and opportunity that's been passed down from people before us, and that has been transmitted for all the flaws that America's had, compared to what is always should be our concern, because we will always, because we live in a fallen world, because we live around sinful human beings, imperfect human beings, we're always going to find imperfections. We're always going to find sinful people. There are going to be people who choose to do what's wrong. But if you focus on that, especially here in America, as it turns out, you're going to miss out on incredible. You're going to miss out on incredible opportunity.
Right. If I may add on kind of where you were going as far as like celebrities, like being that LeBron James, being that Tiger Woods. Yeah. What's sexy about that is that they have that victim story.
Yeah.
So when a young African American hears that, that is what they gravitate to. Yeah. They're like, if he can make it out with the same conditions that I've had, then that's pretty much the only arena that I can partake in. Either be in the sports.
Oh, that's just or in the music and the entertainment industry.
But as far as like, being like STEM, like being a doctor or being,
or just working in business,
or
and joining the regular economy like millions of other Americans.
I guarantee you. Now I don't know the statistics behind this, but I'll go off on a limb and say those individuals who are kind of in that area, that those occupations, have had more of like a nuclear home, have had that, or haven't been as victimized.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways too, there's a strong case to be made. Like you're talking about a nuclear home, having having proper advice and wisdom from your parents and guidance. I know for me, like that's honestly the biggest privilege that I have living here in the United States. It's not the color of my skin. It's not like necessarily the neighborhood that I grew up in or the state that I grew up in. It's having two amazing, wonderful, imperfect, but wonderful counselors by my side called my mom and my dad that have been there to be able to show, hey, son, these are the problems we've had in the past. These are the mistakes we've made. Try to go this way, avoid this, do that, don't do that. And the left, what I'm afraid of the left is coming in and just destroying that completely and saying, no, you don't need a nuclear home. In fact, you don't even have to wait to have sex. You don't even need to have these particular traditional values. Throw all this stuff out because it's oppressive and it's misogynistic and it's sexist and this is the patriarchy and stuff. And they throw and this is feminism instead. Like embrace this instead. They're throwing all that out the window. And what are people left with? They're left with emptiness. They're left with these sorts of results. They're left with thinking that the only way I can really make it is I gotta be a sports star. I gotta be a rapper like my role models. When really your biggest role models and my biggest role models are my mom and my dad. And a lot of families, unfortunately, it's heartbreaking, don't have that.